I was hungry, and it was getting late as I became desperate. So a threshold's opening jaws looked like an inviting entrance. I took the opportunity before the gates could close, but it felt like I had been swallowed. A monolith extended from the bare horizon. Maybe I could find something inside that could be eaten. As the sun faded, the palace was awakened, presenting sheer wealth free from earthly limitations. It was overwhelming to pass under such majesty until I was startled by a sudden shriek. And my path was obstructed by the ragged man before me. Screaming about economics, turning people into monsters who destroy themselves for profit, he urged me not to go onwards. I considered his outrageous claims and decided to proceed ahead. He was obviously insane. I pushed past him, but then he said,
"You are what you eat."
I'm not sure why this odd statement disturbed my mind, but it echoed through my empty stomach as I left him behind, repeating, "You are what you eat," until I went inside. Entering the mansion, I was surrounded by a shadowy assembly, foolishly intruding on their private dinner party. But they didn't throw me out, barely noticing my admission. So my only introduction to them was that insane man's description. He explained that each guest represented a different aspect of business, and his voice whispered to me, characterizing their professions.
First was the philanthropist with generosity and surplus, caring for the upper classes' less fortunate servants. But he profits by keeping your prospects in grasp. So he cultivates dependence with the gift of his scraps. The twin politicians were always campaigning, pursuing their electoral careers instead of trying to change things. You can choose between the two political parties, but they are the same, with two heads from one body. Next was the lobbyist who infests society, controlling government puppets with legal bribery. With no strings to stop him as his investments grow and his influence spreads right under your nose. The advertiser sells a smile on the surface. For your pleasure, he prescribes a more expensive purchase, restraining your mind with commercialized psychiatry and the therapy of a complete lobotomy. The banker will take advantage of trust in a crisis, with assets to spare from his previous clients. But the convenience of the contract has a hidden price, and you will be in his debt for the rest of your life. The broker recklessly trades stock without making a product and collects a fortune by cheating the market, flying free from regulation as his net worth increases, and when crashing, leaves you to pick up the pieces. Last was the news anchor, reporting through mass media broadcast, with journalism filtered through corporate finance. Imposing artificial limits on public debate, his sorcery keeps you uninformed and entertained.
They were more horrifying than I had expected. But at least their underlying system was stable. Maybe they had enough food for me to be fed, and space for an extra seat at their table. They seemed to be waiting for someone else to join them, and as their festivities ended, he was summoned. A thin figure stood, starving and naked.
The capitalist was hungry and impatient. All of his features were missing except for his lips and teeth. The others congregated in fear of his obscene purity. But the capitalist paid no attention to their submissive awe as he was drawn by instinct into the dining hall.
The feast upon the gilded plates offered delectable mountains, and goblets of temptation's taste conceived by eternal fountains, with shrines to unrestricted bloom, nurturing opulence in flesh.
And at the end of greed's pursuits, your host, the heiress of golden success.
The guests took their established places, but for me, there didn't seem to be any space left. Before I could ask the heiress for something to eat, she made a toast and revealed her pregnancy. It appeared that they had been brought here together to dedicate the feast to her unborn successor. So each guest lifted his glass in celebration and emptied the bottle for the next generation, drinking until my presence was completely forgotten. They were focused on massacring their supper, and their aggressive gluttony encouraged my hunger. But as I watched them crush the banquet into a disgusting mass, I was reminded of the man outside's rant, repeating his warning with each bite of their teeth.
You are what you eat. Talking and chewing on what to do with their power, the food in their open mouths was not all devoured. Too divided to compromise for the common good, each guest tried to fill himself with as much as he could. And as they competed over who could eat the most, they stuffed themselves, but only felt more hollow. They hopelessly searched for more when they finished their shares, but they had already eaten everything that had been prepared.
The heiress would provide for them and put an end to the shortage. So she went into the kitchen to check her private resources.
Only the capitalist waited calmly for her to return, while the other guests' impatience with their hunger only got worse. The party would end in chaos if they did not get more to eat.
Then she finally rejoined us.
But there was something that seemed amiss.
Strangely, the heiress herself served their second course, which was distinctly different from the food that had come before. Filling their rising appetites, this cuisine's flavor overflowed, such that each guest took his next bite before the last had been swallowed. Their sophisticated palates recognized something domesticated, but this was the only chance they'd had to actually taste it. Although some of the meats formed an unsettling shape, as they chewed at what resembled muscles, guts, and brains. At least, that's what it looked like, from what I could see. But then, with a sudden shiver, came the clear knowledge of what the meat I had seen might be. After finishing their plates, they looked for anything left undigested. Luckily, they still ignored my presence.
The philanthropist thought if they each regurgitated a little, they could continue their feast without becoming uncivil. But the philanthropist had joined in on the rush to this impasse, and all of his sentiments came out of his ass. Yet his rhetoric had successfully achieved resolution, because now the source of their next meal was an obvious conclusion.
By savagely eating one of their fellow guests, they had abandoned proper table etiquette. No longer requiring social pretense, they simply had to choose who would be slaughtered next. I found myself welcoming their unveiled violence, embracing their accelerating descent, eager to see the results of the elections, awaiting the excessive professions.
When you were dissatisfied with society's conditions, the politicians pacified with the illusion of decision. But someone had to write the laws to protect corporations, so the lobbyists oversaw democracy's privatization. But disempowerment provoked feelings of insecurity, so the advertiser resold trusted brands as personalities. But without sufficient income, there was no money to spend, so the banker lended enough to pay for merchandise with debt. But the interest rates that were owed could not be paid perpetually, so the broker traded the loans to make even more money. But exponential growth collapsed and economic crisis spread, so the news anchor blamed the crash completely on the government. But without the politicians' facade, they could not continue the recession, creating more problems than they could solve with unaccountable oppression.
With so many dismembered guests, I could take everything that was left. But there was still one remaining threat. The capitalist prevailed with hunger that was not yet appeased, persisting as the incarnation of blind and insensate greed. The heiress's provisions filled her guests with desire, and he was pleased to have had them all as an appetizer. Engorging his authority with their dissatisfaction, the capitalist appreciated the ingenuity of famine.
Atop the pits of fear, the coiled tongue appears. Invited to its feast, you are eaten completely. Employed to persevere, as mechanized teeth pierce. The wage of pain is earned. Your power is crushed and purged. Cast out to the abyss of the esophagus. Falling further inwards, your self-reliance inverts. The stomach's vile acid drowns efforts to resist. Expenses must be paid. Your purpose burns with their flames. The accidents of ash inevitably pass. Pathetic saving strain. Your hope dissolves in gastric rain. Immortal underclass, impoverished and prolapsed, struggling to just persist. Your morals relax their grip. Throughout intestine guts, the punishment corrupts. Forgetting fellowship, your identity submits, congealing with disgust until homogeneous, becoming the body while your soul turns into shit. And all throughout the violent flux, this carcass was intentionally bleeding. Its heart's unsympathetic pulse, mechanical but not beating.
Only the fittest deserved to survive through dinner, and the capitalist had chewed off every extra finger. The drooling demon flooding society smiled upon the heiress and unleashed his depravity. His entire organism of insatiable ambition and free market hedonism, economic fetishism, hid his basic definition. For he was a capitalist, and as such worshipped capital. To increase the wealth of the rich, he would even dine with cannibals. Thus, to money personified, he devoted his life. To the heiress, the capitalist sacrificed.
Raw power had been revealed with all the others served, and for her final meal, she'd left you as dessert!
Fed by serpent infrastructure, sprawling over generations, independence smothered under ancestral accumulation, suffocated by compliant, desperate skeletal convulsions, symbiotic bindings tighten, all conjoined by cronyism, buttressing distended fortune, elevated by division, hatched upon the throne's contortions in the predatory kingdom. Without escape from the system, I was victim to her taste.
But she thought you were not yet ripe and took you deeper inside.
Within the darkness of her kitchen, I beheld abundant horror. Nourishing her unborn children, fostered swarming leftovers. People starved while this food decayed, decomposing in shallow graves. I united with rotting waste.
And together we accepted fate.
However, the heiress had already eaten so much that she might burst open.
And it became clear that she was not actually pregnant.
The treasure she tried to consume
Had stuffed her throbbing guts with food.
so she had no heir expected.
And to preserve her legacy,
She needed us to inherit.
the economic hierarchy.
But I decided to withdraw, without even taking a crumb. And as I departed, I watched
As she ate what she was.